Live from New York, this is CNN Newsroom with Polo Sandoval.
All right, welcome everybody. U.S. Central Command says that it has concluded a 9th consecutive night of strikes against Iran. Explosions were heard in cities across the northwest and coastal areas. Iranian state media reporting that its military also launched missiles toward enemy targets. Kuwait's army says that air defenses are responding to drone threats, and in Bahrain saying that their air raid sirens have been activated. Meanwhile, the U.S. military is reporting the death of another American service member who was killed in northern Iraq during the controlled detonation of a downed Iranian drone. Here's what President Trump had to say about the recent strikes and these troop fatalities.
Well, we feel very badly, but those great people, those great patriots were out there fighting that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Iran has been very, very badly damaged. They've lost everything almost militarily. They've got very little left. They've got some missiles. They've got some drones. They've got some manufacturing ability, not much. We control the Strait. They don't control anything. So we'll see what happens, but we hit them very hard again tonight.
Let's go to CNN's Leila Garagozlu live from Abu Dhabi as she continues to cover this. So Leila, give us a sense of where some of these strikes have actually been focused.
Yeah, so as you said, it is the 9th consecutive day of strikes between the U.S. and Iran. The U.S. said that it hit a number of Iranian military targets Sunday night into today, Monday morning. Now, Iranian state media said that there were explosions heard across the southern region of Iran, as well as in the northwestern region of Iran, close to the city of Tabriz. Now, that would be the first time in these 9 days that we're hearing any sort of explosions in that area. Earlier on in this war, in the early months, much of the U.S. and Israeli strikes were focused on the more inland cities like Tehran, Esfahan, and Tabriz. This time around, in these 9 days, these strikes have been really focused on the southern region. Now, the southern region is considered to be Iran's defensive arch. These cities like Bandar Abbas, Ahvaz, and also these islands like Qeshm Island and Harg Island really are part of the way that Iran is able to control the Strait of Hormuz. Now, that's why we're seeing the U.S. really focus its strikes in this southern region. Now, when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz and who controls it, the IRGC says that the Iranians still control it and that they've closed it. The UK Maritime Authority said that it got a report of a vessel on fire, and the Revolutionary Guards said that they had 2 tankers that they found to be non-compliant and therefore targeted. So really asserting their control over the strait. Now, we're in a very fragile situation between the U.S. and Iran, and there's some serious concern among analysts that I've spoken to about this escalating and expanding if no off-ramp is found. So we're going to have to see what happens over the next week. Polo?
All right, Leila Garagozlu, thank you so much for all that reporting. As always, appreciate your time. Let's go now to Nega Anga joining me now. She's a visiting fellow with King's College London, and she was a senior advisor at the U.S. State Department and National Security Council. Thank you so much for joining us, Nega. Great to see you again.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. So after the U.S. and Iran, they traded strikes for a 9th straight night, as you just heard in Leila's report. Do you see any potential off-ramps right now? I mean, a question that so many are asking, what would de-escalation actually look like?
That's a great question. I mean, look, I think we have to be very realistic. We can't look for some sort of grand political agreement, not even anything close to what the Memorandum of Understanding looked like just a week or so ago. What we need to sort of look for is some sort of emergency operating arrangement for the Hormuz. And I think that's where you're going to have sort of those back channel diplomatic conversations to try to find a solution to essentially the Strait of Hormuz, how it's going to operate, the recognized sort of shipping lanes, who monitors, who clears it, all of those technical details, and essentially kind of like a freeze for freeze sort of approach, so that we move away from, essentially what looks like punishment becoming a strategy. So I do think there is, a small window, and there is that diplomatic off-ramp there. The only sort of disconcerting factor is, there is so much direct military friction right now that this could, this could be a slippery slope into something much larger.
So if in fact there are some of those back channel conversations that you referenced, I'm just curious, who do you think are some of those parties in addition to the U.S. and Iran? Do you think that some of the Gulf nations would be potentially involved?
Absolutely. The mediators need to continue to stay involved. They have obviously a lot of domestic and personal interest in making sure that the fighting halts. But it's going to require quite a bit of that shuttle diplomacy. They're going to have to be going back and forth between both capitals to try to convince them that they need to come to the table to discuss. The issue is, and it's the idea of trying to convince both parties that you are losing this window of opportunity. Once this window closes, it's going to be very hard to find a diplomatic off-ramp. An off-ramp is always possible. It's just, how do you not lose face in front of your domestic audience? And that window is quite small, both for the United States, but also for Iran, who is under a lot of economic constraints right now. So again, the mediators are going to have to be involved. Mediators can range from, obviously Pakistan, Qatar, and all the other regional countries who are being directly impacted by these volleying attacks taking place over the last week or so.
Let's talk a little bit more about this clear widening of this conflict. Nega, we already know that a Kuwaiti power and desalination plant was struck by Iran for the second time, actually, and the U.S. striking Iranian sites like bridges and power stations. So does this targeting of that kind of infrastructure, do you think that it increases the risk for civilians in the region? Is that something that we should now be seriously worried about?
We definitely should be. Again, I think the objectives in some ways have been quite clear, right? On the United States side, the immediate objectives were clear, punish attacks on U.S. personnel, protect commercial shipping, reduce Iran's coastal capacity to control or threaten the strait. So, it's very clear why they have these very specific targeted attacks. A lot of times they see them as, military infrastructure, that are important key sites. For Iran's behavior, it's very clear that they're basically saying that we're being reactive. We are showing the same kind of proportional attacks against the United States that it's causing to us. So we see sort of both sides and what they're trying to do. The issue is that each side is ramping up their attacks, hoping that will convince the other side to change their course in the negotiations and come to the table. Obviously, again, when you have these direct military frictions, there are going to be a slippage. It will move past certain red lines. This is where civilians will be impacted. And at this point in time, we're talking about civilians in third countries, in the Gulf countries in and around Iran, and not necessarily, there's obviously direct U.S. personnel, but not necessarily on the U.S. homeland. And so this is going to be a huge concern, because there is no guarantee when you have this kind of tit for tat that it's going to push each of the adversaries back towards the negotiating table. Again, I think this is why you're going to be seeing a lot of these countries who are directly impacted, working the phones, having the various conversations, because they need to ensure the security and safety of their own citizens.
Yeah, I know that clearly raising the stakes now for people in the entire region. Nega, as always, thank you so much for your critical analysis. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, oil markets, they are reacting to the new strikes in the Middle East. In fact, we want to give you this quick look at Brent crude, which is the international benchmark. You also see West Texas to the U.S. benchmark. You see Brent crude now about $90 a barrel, with WTI numbers shortly below that at about 80, closing in on 85. Obviously, those renewed strikes, but also the disruptions, tanker disruptions on the Strait of Hormuz, certainly heightening some supply concerns and fueling some of these numbers. So we'll keep checking back on them. Well, Russia has launched one of its largest ballistic missile attacks on Ukraine since the war started more than 4 years ago. Ukraine's Air Force saying that the main target of Sunday's assault was the capital city of Kyiv, which faced a variety of missile and attack drones. Authorities are saying that at least 16 people were killed and that 17 others were injured across Ukraine, mainly in the Kharkiv and Donetsk regions. Well, a large-scale attack prompted Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to issue a plea for allies to expedite deliveries of previously promised air defense packages. This is him.
The danger remains even now, and this must be taken into account. Russia is placing its bets on ballistic missiles, and it is because of them that Putin still believes in his war. It is very important that our partners understand what is happening, and that we need air defense missiles to protect lives literally every single day.
And in just a few hours, Andy Burnham will be officially the new British Prime Minister. He'll be the latest in a line of quick successions in the office, the 7th Prime Minister in a decade. Burnham succeeding Keir Starmer, who won the position in a landslide victory just 2 years ago, but leaves the role after months of controversy. And Burnham has to hit the ground running and reveal his positions on some of the pressing issues that are currently moving through Parliament. Let's go live now to London, where our Anna Stewart is joining me with the latest developments as we wait. So, Anna, he'll be stepping into a job with a very high turnover rate. What can we expect?
Certainly is a high turnover, 7th Prime Minister in 10 years, which means we're all getting pretty used to transitions like this here on Downing Street. What is especially interesting about this transition, though, with Andy Burnham, there has been no leadership contest within the party or, of course, a general election. On the one hand, that means Andy Burnham will become Prime Minister with a party largely, at least on the surface, united behind him, which is a big difference we've had in the past, particularly with some of the Conservative Prime Ministers. On the other hand, that does mean he hasn't really been publicly grilled in terms of what he thinks about various policies, especially in an area like foreign policy. We really don't know a huge amount about where Andy Burnham stands. There's been a few leaks over the weekend in terms of policies we might be able to expect, perhaps more drilling in the North Sea, for instance. That will be to come perhaps in his speech. We might get a few pointers there. What's particularly interesting in the UK, this is a parliamentary system, so Andy Burnham will have a constitutional mandate to lead. The largest party in Parliament, elected in 2024, has appointed him. However, that does rather tie him to the 2024 Labour Party manifesto. If he sort of travels too far from that, critics may suggest he doesn't have a political mandate. So he's in a very tricky position, Andy Burnham. Everyone wants to see change. He has promised the most significant change in politics for 40 years, but at the same time, he is rather tied to the promises of his predecessor, Keir Starmer, from 2024. Who, as you say, was largely unpopular despite a landslide victory. What we expect from today in terms of the comings and goings, we're going to have Keir Starmer give a speech here in Downing Street, his final farewell before he heads to see the King. That's where he formally tenders his resignation, and then we almost have the opposite from Andy Burnham. He will see the King before coming to Downing Street and giving his first speech here. Things to watch, things that people get very excited about. Firstly, when the podium will come out on Downing Street in front of the door, it gets brought out by a sound engineer who has gone rather viral on social media, #HotPodiumGuy, and of course Larry the Cat Polo, who, if he is still there, let me just check, is very hidden outside the doors of number 10 Downing Street. He's currently on top of a sort of heat vent, keeping warm because it's a slightly chilly start to a summer's day. All that to come.
Yeah, and we are certainly seeing some of those preparations underway. Anna Stewart, thank you so much for that live report from Downing Street, the so-called hot podium guy and the cat, likely to steal the show. Thank you so much. We'll check it back with you. And still a lot more to get to here on CNN Newsroom, including Spain writing itself a new chapter in the history books with its World Cup history. More on the celebrations that are probably still going on. And a little later, President Trump's approval ratings. They are near all-time lows with the midterm elections only a few months away. We'll be breaking down the very latest numbers and see how they compare to some of the previous administrations.